Across the pond, we had the coronation of a new king over the weekend. But here in America, we had a prince choose USC as his college choice. Does Bronny James make USC the Pac-12 favorites?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We are your hosts. He's Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade, and we are so glad to be with you today, especially you everydayers who are tuned in with us each and every day, even through the offseason. Man, it's awesome to talk college basketball with you. Speaking of which, we are just shy of 900 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who has jumped in. If you haven't done that, we're asking you to go do it right now. Go give it a subscribe. Be part of this growing community. This episode, by the way, is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Coming up on the show today, Bronny. Okay, so Andy, I mean, seriously, it's kind of the thing where, I mean, it is what it is. When LeBron James' son decides to commit to college, he's gonna get a lot of airtime, and that is what that is. But in a more serious way, we do want to talk about what it means for USC. We do want to talk about kind of the long-term thing, because there is this whole NBA conversation that we got to touch on. And as we typically do on Mondays, we got a six-pack for you at the end of player movement information. So, Andy, let's just start with that question I posed off the top. USC gets Bronny James. Do they move to the top of the Pac-12 because of it?
You know, I'm not sure how much Bronny moves the needle specifically, but I do think that USC is in the conversation right now for a variety of reasons. Bronny James,
you would have had them there already,
right?
In the conversation, at least.
Exactly. I think Bronny absolutely helps. I think he's a player who's matured and grown so much in the last few months that I think a lot of people who have maybe some more outdated takes on him might be like, well, he was a guy who, is even going to be a Power 5 starter. Like, those were conversations that people were having last year, like in November. Like, it wasn't that long ago that was kind of the knock on Bronny is he even a player capable of being like a serious needle mover at the Division I Power 5 level? And I think the answer now is definitively yes, he is that. He has grown, he has matured, he has improved as a basketball player. He's gotten stronger, his decision making has improved, and I do think that he comes in and instantly helps make a already strong USC backcourt stronger. They have Isaiah Collier coming in. He's one of if not the very best player in that recruiting class. They have Boogie Ellis coming back, which is a really nice return for them to have Ellis come back into the fold and be there for another season. For me, I think the conversation for the Pac-12 remains the big three in UCLA, in Arizona, in USC. And I think USC has moved much closer into that conversation. I think it's harder to fully judge without knowing a lot about what UCLA's roster is going to look like. Jalen Clark's in the draft process, and Dembona's in the draft process. We don't expect Amari Bailey, to be coming back. They have some guys coming in, but UCLA is a bit more of a question mark than they have been historically. Arizona made a huge move by adding Jaden Bradley from Alabama.
They added a player from their own roster. Way to go.
No, they add Bradley. That's a huge addition for them. I think with Boswell, with Pella Larson, with Umar Ballo, I think that team is going to be fine next year. I think they still have some more additions to potentially make. But I do think that USC is really close to being in that conversation. And I think if Bronny can reach that kind of upper end of his threshold, be a 15-point per game guy, be a guy who, I don't think he's going to be a huge facilitator, but a guy who gets buckets, who scores efficiently, who adds some depth to that backcourt, I think USC can absolutely contend to win the Pac-12 next year.
It's funny. I think we should start using that phrase on this show, needle mover. Are you a needle mover?
Yeah.
I think that just became part of our vernacular, and I'm here for it. It's interesting because I think Bronny does, but it's more of a depth thing because of those two other backcourt guys you talked about. It just makes this an interesting choice, period. And we'll talk about that side of it here in just a second. But I think he has grown enough, as you said, to be a a high major starter now, but I don't think he's going to start for this team unless Coach Enfield goes like full on 3-guard lineup, because he's not starting over Boogie Ellis. And I highly doubt he'll start over Isaiah Collier either. Right. And so for me, when I look at this, I think Bronny is, probably one of the first guys off the bench, but I don't think he's in that starting 5. And so he's, for me at this point, obviously we got to see what happens when everyone gets on the court. But as we sit here in early May 2023, I think he's a needle mover in terms of what he brings coming off the bench. I would say right now, he's the 3rd best guard on this team behind Ellis and Collier. And that's not a negative thing about Bronny. Right. It's a positive thing about those other 2 guys. And so like,
and they're all 6'3", Isaac. I just looked it up real quickly. Really? They're all 6'3". I was like, oh, maybe I thought Boogie was like 6'5", 6'6". So
yeah,
I would maybe he could play some small ball 3, but no, he's listed at 6'3". Collier's listed at 6'3". Bronny's listed at 6'3". So I think it's tough. I think you're right. It's tough to play all 3 of those guys at the same time. And if you can't play, those are probably your 3 best players next year, unless I'm missing somebody, or else they make some more additions, which they certainly could do. But
yeah,
that's rough. That's rough to have all those guys be kind of that tweener size too. Like 6'3" is too small to be a combo guard in the NBA, but it's not too small to be a combo guard in college. No. But it's you probably don't want 3 guys playing at that size. Even the Pac-12, it's not the Big 12 or the even the Big 10 or the SEC, but they got enough size in the Pac-12 that if you're starting 3 guys at 6'3", I think you're gonna get bullied around a little bit.
Oh, Pella Larson would be exploiting that all day long. Like, what I'm saying? Like, that's just how that's gonna go when they play Arizona. And so I just don't think you can unless you're, as you said, going a true small ball.
Yeah.
And because of that, I obviously get why it's USC, because Dad's a Laker, right?
Yeah.
But for the longest time, I really thought it would be Ohio State. Obviously, in the past month or so, it's been USC. Like, that's been the call. And honestly, I thought it was going to happen weeks ago, the way the kind of smoke was trending.
Yeah.
But Andy, like when you think about what you just said about, I should answer my own question, by the way. I think right now I'd take Arizona over USC and UCLA, just because of that roster fluctuation you talked about. So I think what you said though is the play that USC stays in that upper tier. But I think if I were ranking it right now, I've got Arizona as my Pac-12 favorite. Now, in some ways, because of that same fluctuation at UCLA, I know they weren't in consideration as one of the final couple schools, but if you want to be in LA near Dad, maybe playing for Mick Cronin is a better option. I don't. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I wonder how much UCLA showed interest here, because we kind of talked about their roster fluctuation with all the players. A lot of guards who are kind of uncertain whether they're going to come back or not. Amari Bailey's made it pretty clear that he's not planning to come back, so there's a gap there. They got some incoming freshmen coming in, so I do wonder how much of UCLA was and LeBron made it very clear when he spoke publicly that we could send Bronny to any school in America. Anybody's going to take him. And
I don't think that's true though.
Statement necessarily was. Yes. I don't know if there are any coaches who really would have pushed back on that, if Mick Cronin would have been one of them who pushed back or not. USC is a compelling fit from a notoriety perspective. They're a very, very, very famous school in the LA area, obviously playing in the Pac-12. They're going to play some good teams. But yeah, I don't know from a basketball fit if it is the best. And to your point about him potentially committing earlier, I do think that there was maybe plans for him to commit sooner, because I remember reading some like underground rumors of like Bronny's going to commit tomorrow. Bronny's going to commit this weekend. And then that was like right when Boogie Ellis announced he was coming back. And then all of a sudden it took a month for Bronny to commit. So I think there might have been some second guessing that could have happened there. Some like questions of like, hey, do I want to go to a school with another 6'3" guard? And ultimately he decided to. And I think it's going to be really fun to see how everything shakes out at USC. But there's also an added kind of drama element here, an added, there's going to be a media circus around Bronny James, for better or worse. He dominated the news cycle for kind of committing somewhat arbitrarily on a Saturday without really trying to dominate the news cycle. That's still what happened. Here we are.
Most people were thinking about horses.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see how that media circus following USC, following Coach Enfield, following that team and Bronny will impact them, because I do think they have the potential to be a top 2, even potentially win the Pac-12. I really do. But there's going to be a lot riding on this team this year.
Okay, so Andy, let me ask you this question then. Let's say you are the Andy in charge of the USC program. Is it worth that media circus that you just talked about? Coach Andy Patton, head coach of the USC. What's our joke now?
The Wildcats.
Yes, Andy Patton, head coach of the USC Wildcats. Is it worth the media circus for you to have Bronny James on your team? Is it worth it? Yes or no?
Yes, I say yes, it is. Even if he's not starting, yes.
Why? Give me like 2 sentences. Why?
Because he's talented enough to still make it. He's still a needle mover, as we discussed. And I think that more publicity for your program, while it can be annoying at times, is only going to help more recruits who want to go there. It's only going to help unless something really bad happens, it's going to be good publicity for them. And I think that that's a good thing.
What if you're a teammate?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point. And I would hope that Enfield and the staff did enough kind of vetting, not just of Bronny, but of like the rest of the team. Like, how do we feel about this? Like Boogie, when Boogie made the announcement to come back, he had to know that this could happen, and he chose to come back anyway. Collier has been advocating strongly for Bronny to join him. So I think that there's some love there already, but yeah, I could see it maybe, but again, some of the guys who it might have alienated, Reese Dixon Waters, he entered the portal. Trey White just entered the portal. He's going to Louisville. So like maybe there's some guys who already said, I don't really want to deal with it. Sure. I'm out the door, but I think they got a good core around him right now. And I think I'd be happy bringing him in.
Hey, and if you get to operate in the King's Circle a little bit and go to a couple Lakers games behind the scenes, that's not too bad of a gig for next year's college basketball. All right, Andy, 2 quick under-overs I want us to both answer. I think this is a really interesting conversation. LeBron James Jr. is actually factually correct. Bronny James next season, over under 15 minutes a game.
Over.
I agree. Bronny James next season, over under 10 points a game.
That's a lot closer. I'm going to say over, but I think it's going to be like 10 and a half. Like, I think it's going to be right there.
This is where I go under, but I think it's because of what I said earlier, like just because of the depth chart, right? Yeah. Like I think he has enough minutes per game, but I think he ends up being like a 7-8 point a game kind of guy. And so again, close, but on the underside for me.
Well, Isaac, let's project this out a little bit further, because looking ahead at this time next year, are we going to be talking about Bronny James in the NBA draft process? Are we going to be chatting with our good friend Leaf Tulane about him as an NBA prospect? Are we going to be talking about him coming back for his sophomore year of college? What are we going to be talking about with Bronny James? Because right now that's a big question, is he a one and done talent or not? We are going to get much more into that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. So if you want to bet on Bronny's father, LeBron, to take home a championship with the Los Angeles Lakers, you can do so. This app it's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use, and you can get paid instantly. There is not a better place to bet in all of the playoff actions than America's #1 sportsbook. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen every day. For you everydayers, we got more coming up this week on continued transfer portal updates. We'll talk about Kansas and what it means for them adding Hunter Dickinson, continue that conversation. We got plenty of more guests and updates to keep you posted as we look ahead to the final week of players entering the transfer portal this upcoming week. But for right now, Isaac, I want to continue our conversation about Bronny James, because, again, we kind of touched on this in the first segment, but his stock has risen. And I know that there are some people who are skeptical, and there are some people who are going to just be skeptics and critics of Bronny, period. They're just going to remain in that conversation. The great Raphael Barlow, the host of Locked On NBA Big Board, posted a tweet recently where he said that it does not matter how Bronny James performs next year. There are going to be people who think that he is overrated, and there are going to be people who think that he is underrated. It does not, he could put up 20 points a game and people think that it is overrated. It's just the nature of being somebody who's been in the limelight for as long as he has. But this is a player he's 19th at ESPN in the 2023 class rankings, 26th at 24/7 Sports, 21st in their composite rankings. So we're talking about a guy who, I mean, players in that range often do end up being one and done guys. Like, not always, certainly. Sometimes they don't end up, being even sticking at the Division I level or at the high major level. It obviously varies year to year, but I think we're looking at a guy who has that potential. I would be surprised, not shocked. I would be surprised if he emerged as like an obvious, no doubt, slam dunk. This is a dude who should be a one and done talent, but he may not have to do that. He could put up 12, 3 and 3 and still be in that conversation because of the appeal of playing for his dad. Kind of what are your thoughts on Bronny as a potential one and done talent, having just kind of aired out what we think his stats are going to look like next year?
This really is, Andy, one of the most intriguing conversations I feel like we've had in quite some time. First, two quick things that you were just saying made me think of. Talked about Bronny could average 20 a game and still be like underrated or whatever. It just made me think, I would have loved to have seen a year of LeBron in college just to see what would have happened. Like, insane. Was it like Zion on, Zion plus basically?
Yeah.
By the way, the other thing is that Bronny's commitment on Saturday night gave his pops a little bump. They finally got a game on the Warriors and beat them by like 30. And so you love to do that. As for Bronny, his movement up the rankings, I think, is merit based, not last name based, right? And I think there's something important that we need to recognize there, as you've been saying, that it is so much more than just riding daddy's coattails,
right?
It is in that still, like, it is much closer to the one and done conversation, as you were alluding to, very much still on that fringe. Like, he is no surefire thing.
Yeah.
But now it is a conversation. Whereas this time a year ago, I remember having conversations where I was like, no, I mean, not at all.
Yeah,
right?
There's no way.
Yeah. But he has grown enough in this past year. And that is, man, credit to this young man.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to start looking at things kind of like you said, of like, because LeBron has been so public about wanting to play with him, does it put what kind of pressure has that put on this 17, 18-year-old young man to feel like he has to perform? Now, I mean, I can now envision a world when I close my eyes and look ahead 3, 4, 5 years where Bronny James is on an NBA roster.
Yeah.
I heard Gary Parrish recently say, like, hey, Giannis's brothers are in the NBA, and that's at least in some part because of what their last name is. And so it's not like there's no precedent for that type of thing. And so based on his own thing, if I was looking at it today, I would say no, that Bronny, based on his own talent and a different last name, would likely not be a one and done guy.
Right.
He would be on the fringe of it. Yes. Now, some of that is going to be opportunity based. Some of that is going to be based on what are NBA scouts seeing?
Right.
But if you take that out of it, and because we're not looking at this in a vacuum, if we're being honest, does he go into the NBA draft? Somebody puts, and if I understand LeBron's contract correctly, he has an opt out after next season. So could he basically put it out there and say, all right, folks, you want me? Draft my kid. I'm coming.
I think, honestly, what's going to happen is I think that if Bronny were to declare for the NBA draft and stay in the process and go through the whole thing, I think the Lakers would just draft him. Like, I think that's honestly the simplest solution here is the Lakers are just going to say, yeah, especially if, I mean, already at the point we're at now, the Lakers having had this kind of playoff success when it was not expected at all. And I'm not a huge NBA guy. I don't follow it a ton, but I can tell you a couple things. One, LeBron at age, 38? Is that what he is now?
He's a year. I always remember he came out a year after me from high school. Right. I'm like, oh, this grown man is, okay, cool.
But at that age, for him to be still carrying a team, I mean, they have talent around, and they have Anthony Davis when he's healthy and contributing, which is kind of sporadic, to say the least. LeBron is carrying this team through the playoffs, carried them to victory over the Kings, like carrying them through in this series against the Warriors. Like, players at age 38 don't do that like that. And it's just added to the list that is miles long of things LeBron does that other people don't do. That's just
because players at 18 and 19 didn't do what he did, right? Exactly. Why would we think it'd be any different now?
Exactly. But I think that so much of the conversation around Bronny a while ago, like a year and a half, even before that, was like, well, he's going to have to be a one and done because LeBron's not going to be able to still be playing when Bronny's a senior in college. And it's like, I don't have that belief anymore. I have it's hard for me to imagine 41-year-old LeBron James being so much worse than 38-year-old LeBron James that he's no longer in the league. It's basically impossible for me to imagine. Eventually LeBron James will slow down. Father Time it's undefeated. It will catch him eventually. But most 38-year-olds are like, maybe they're like 15-5-2, and they're coming off the bench now, or they're reinvent themselves as a lockdown defender like Vince Carter, where you just shoot threes and play defense. And
I was just thinking about that. How old was he when he retired?
Right. He was in his 40s, but he wasn't doing this when he was 38.
His last, I just looked it up. Vince's last game was at 43 years and 45 days.
That's insane.
So there's a frame of reference.
Right. And Vince, I don't know what Vince did when he was 38, but it wasn't this. Like, LeBron can continue this kind of success for 2 to 3 years. And so for Bronny, and LeBron had a quote, and I didn't put the exact notes, I'm paraphrasing it, but he basically said, my dream is to play with my son, but that's not necessarily Bronny's dream. And I don't think he meant that like Bronny doesn't want to play on the same team as his dad. I assume he does, but I think he meant it more like Bronny's not rushing himself to the NBA. That's the way that I interpreted that quote, is Bronny's going to do what's best for Bronny. And I'm sure on some level that's what LeBron wants to, even though he really does want to play with his kid. And I get that. That would be very cool for him to get that opportunity to do. But I don't think that Bronny has to be a one and done. And I don't think that pressure is on him anymore. And I think I could see him being a 2 and done guy, where Boogie's out the door after 1 year, and Collier might be out the door after 1 year. He's got that kind of one and done talent on him. So if Bronny is all of a sudden the leader of this team in year 2 as a sophomore, can he go out and get 16 a game and be a guy who goes in the first round of his second year and deserves it? And it's not because of nepotism. It's not because of his dad. It's because he deserves to be there. I think absolutely. And I think that might be the smarter, better path. Can Bronny be patient enough? Can LeBron be patient enough? Those are the questions that need to be answered. But I think that there's a real avenue to that for Bronny.
Well, and I think we've begun to see the seeds of that it's not completely just about the circus. I've thought for a long time that it was going to be, but even in things with like how unheralded his announcement was, right? Like, one of the things I was thinking about over the weekend was the decision with LeBron and how that, for a while, everyone's like, come on, bro, really? But it's like, this was the anti version of that, where it's like, maybe we are in a world where it's like, okay, let's let Bronny be Bronny. And I love that path that you just laid out, Andy. That timeline makes a ton of sense. Let Bronny just be a kid for a couple of years, because after this, he won't be.
Right.
Heck, let's let LeBron play long enough to get Bryce up there, and they can all three play.
Why not, right?
At that point. But I think it's going to be really interesting. And at the end of the day, though, we got to play this upcoming basketball season before we can determine any of this.
Right.
Who knows? Maybe Boogie Ellis gets hurt. There's just a world of possibilities out there. It's fun to speculate about, but obviously we're going to have a whole season's worth of eyeballs after eyeball on that young man, seeing how he does. All right, Andy, that's probably enough Bronny for one day. Let's get into our 6-pack of player movement going around. We had some big ACC news drop on Sunday, several other things, and we'll get to all of that in just a second. All right, Andy, as we often do, we will close our Monday show with a 6-pack. During the season, it's usually game results from over the weekend. But as we are in the off season, I love that we now have like a legit off season in college basketball.
You can't cut the 6-pack. You got to keep the 6-pack.
We got to keep the 6-pack going. And so, we start in the ACC, where we had 2 intra-conference transfers over the weekend. Number one, I'll start, and then Andy will take the other one, is Matthew Cleveland, who's been in the transfer portal from Florida State, leaving Leonard Hamilton's team, and he will be suiting up, staying in state. Smart move. You don't have to go too terribly far, but he's going way down south to Miami to play for Coach Jim Larrañaga. And Andy, as I look at this immediately, like, my gut reaction is he is the Jordan Miller replacement for this team. He doesn't do all the same stuff as Jordan Miller. Like, to me, he's clearly not as good a three-point shooter, but does a lot of that same like athletic type of stuff that Jordan Miller did to be probably, I think he will be, we often talked last year about Jordan Miller being underrated. I don't think it'll be the same thing with Matthew Cleveland, especially with Isaiah Wong gone. But assuming the Canes get back Nigel PAC as we expect, assuming they get back Norchad Omier as we expect, and you mix that with Wooga Poplar and others, and man, these Canes are right back in that top tier conversation in the ACC next season.
Yeah, top 10 team potentially for the Canes with Cleveland coming in. Next transfer, another ACC to ACC transfer with not top 10 teams here between Syracuse and Clemson. That's, of course, Joe Girard. 4-year starter at Syracuse. He played a whole bunch of minutes under Jim Boeheim in the Orange. 13 points per game for his career. Girard, very, very good scorer, very, very good guard. Moving on to Clemson, a really big boost for their backcourt. They also added Jack Clark out of NC State. So Clemson loaded up on some guards, and I think they're going to be in a position to hopefully compete for another spot in the NCAA tournament like they did last year.
When Rick Pitino took the job at St. John's, he shipped a lot of guys out like Coach Prime did at Colorado, but that means he's also got to bring a bunch in. And one of those is going to be freshman Brady Dunlap, who decommitted from Notre Dame when Mike Bray announced that it was going to be his last year. Dunlap's been playing his high school ball out on the West Coast, and he comes back east where he kind of grew up a little bit. And he is going to be there, had a host of teams he was looking at, but is going to be part of this first recruiting class for Coach Pitino at St. John's. And we've seen it, Andy, every time Coach Pitino's gone somewhere, very quickly, he's gotten that ship turned around. This dude, curious to see how quickly he steps into playing time. But from everything I've watched on him, is a really, really good shooter.
And Pitino keeps reloading over there. I think the Johnnies are going to be a very fun team to watch next year. Speaking of Notre Dame obviously loses Dunlap. That's a tough pill for them, but they did add Keba NJ from Penn State. He follows Coach Micah Shrewsbury, of course, who took that job at Notre Dame, replacing Mike Bray. NJ's a 6'10 forward. He averaged 3.5 points per game last year. He made 26 starts. He wasn't a big scorer, more of a rebounder, more of a defensive presence. Still only played about 14 minutes per game, but I think he's going to come over and play a nice role for Notre Dame, a team that could use some help in the front court.
Well, K-State was one of the great stories of all of last year. We had so much fun watching them here on our show. And unfortunately, though, for them, they lose one of their big players from last year, Ish Massoud, who is going to head off, to join Ed Cooley at Georgetown. This is Massoud's third school. He had been at Wake Forest his first 2 years, went to K-State, and now heads off to the Big East. So he will have played in half of the Power Six conferences in college basketball by the time it's all said and done. A little bit of a streaky shooter, but had some big moments, big shots for K-State in the tournament last year. For me, this is a fun get, a good get for Ed Cooley.
Finally, we're talking about Baylor, and guess what? I think that was the first time this year, this offseason, where we're talking about good things for Baylor, because it's really been a rough offseason for Scott Drew. They lose, Keontae George to the draft. They lose Adam Flagler, who is likely going to stay in the draft process, although we don't know. LJ Cryer transfers to Houston. Dale Bonner transfers to Ohio State. It's been a tough offseason for the Bears, but they're going to get a big-time player coming into the program. It's not a transfer. It is a reclassification for Vez Missy from Prolific Prep. He's a 6'10 center. He was the 37th ranked player in the class of 2024, now in the 2023 class, of course. And this is going to help them a lot in the front court because Flo Thamba's out to graduation, a guy who never really materialized as an offensive threat, but was a big-time rebounder, rim protector, that kind of guy. They needed some help there. They're losing Jalen Bridges. They needed players just about everywhere. They were losing guards. They're losing forwards. They were kind of just in a situation where our friend Drake Toll, the host of Locked On Baylor, was like, I think it's about time to start hitting the panic button. Like, they were getting real worried, but having Missy join the program next year, he's a 6'10 guy who I think is going to have an impact on this team in the front court right away, and sorely needed one for Scott Drew and the Bears if they want to stay competitive in the Big 12. All right, Isaac, that is going to do it for us today, the Bronny James episode on Monday. And folks, we're going to probably talk more about Bronny James this offseason, one of the more fascinating players entering college basketball for next season. But we got so much more transfer portal content as we get to the end of the portal window. Next week is the NBA Draft Combine. We'll have plenty of content about that. It is a busy, busy time in college basketball, and we are here for you 5 days a week. Find us on YouTube if you have not done so yet. We are 3 away as we're recording this from 900 subscribers, which means we are 103 away, math, from 1,000 subscribers. I'd love to be at 1,000 subscribers before the NBA draft. I know that you all can help us get there. So if you have not done so yet, go to youtube.com, search Locked On College Basketball, hit that big red subscribe button. You can also find us wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a review on iTunes. Follow us on Twitter. All of that great stuff. More fantastic content coming your way later this week here on Locked On College Basketball. For now, though, peace out.